Hello, everyone. I'm Tony Monaco, president of Tufts University, and it's a pleasure for me to welcome students, faculty, staff, and alumni and friends of the university to tonight's event. It's always such a pleasure to see members of the community gather to engage with the guests who visit our campus to discuss the important issues of the day. I also want to acknowledge some of the elected officials from across the Commonwealth here this evening: Massachusetts Treasurer Deborah Goldberg, State Representatives Keiko Oral and Paul Donato, Medford Mayor Stephanie Burke, Medford City Council President Rick Caraviello, and Somerville Alderman Matt McLaughlin. It is always a pleasure to welcome you to Tufts University. Today's talk is this year's second event in the Tisch College Distinguished Speaker Series, a program that brings leaders from diverse backgrounds to campus to discuss some of the most pressing challenges facing our society. At a time when many people across the country and indeed around the world feel a great degree of uncertainty, these conversations about how we face those challenges and move forward together are all the more vital. Last month, Tisch College hosted Senator Tim Kaine, who offered valuable insights on domestic and international affairs from his perspective in the U.S. Capitol. Tonight, we welcome Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker to offer us a view from the State House of the issues facing the country and the Commonwealth. Sitting down with Governor Baker will be Alan Solomon, Dean of Tufts University's Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life. Alan returned to Tufts as Dean of Tisch College 3 years ago, but he has been connected to the university as a student, parent, visiting instructor, and trustee for 50 years. As Dean of Tisch College, Alan plays a leading role in advancing the historic mission of Tufts University, educating a generation of young people who are ready to engage with the world, solve problems, and contribute to civic life. Before becoming dean, Alan served under President Obama as the United States ambassador to Spain and Andorra, where he helped to strengthen bilateral ties on matters of global security and economic cooperation. Alan's dedication to civic engagement at Tufts and beyond make him an invaluable leader in our university and a fitting conversation partner for today's guest speaker. Please welcome Dean Alan Solomon.
Thank you, Tony, and I join you in welcoming the distinguished elected officials from throughout the Commonwealth, as well as everyone who is here this evening to enjoy our conversation with Governor Baker. I'm sure very few of you believe that I've actually been around here for 50 years, but it's true. I first set foot on this campus 50 years ago this fall. As President Monaco mentioned, this is the second forum as part of the Tisch College Distinguished Speaker Series. We are looking to host a number of other distinguished guests during the rest of the semester, including Marian Wright Edelman, the founder and president of the Children's Defense Fund. We're having a panel discussion on March 7th featuring Robert Putnam, Shirley Sagawa, our own Peter Levine, who are going to talk about the civic and democratic life in America at this challenging time. And we will be partnering with the Fletcher School's Murrow Forum to host Lester Holt, the anchor of NBC Nightly News and Dateline NBC, for the 12th annual Murrow Forum. You can find out more information about these and other Tisch College events by referring to our website. Our mission at Tisch College is to prepare young people to embrace their responsibilities and as citizens and to effect meaningful change in their communities, their nation, and the world. Through academic courses, internships, leadership development, and service learning, we provide educational opportunities that equip students with the knowledge, skills, and values necessary to participate in democracy. We are guided by the belief that the more individuals engage in civic and political life, the more just, equitable, and prosperous our world becomes. As I noted last month when we hosted Senator Kaine, many Americans are rediscovering this notion in the wake of the recent presidential election. But for many, that renewed eagerness to participate in our democracy also comes with a sense of trepidation about engaging with others with whom we may have profound differences. How do we have productive conversations in such a polarized political environment? When do we stand our ground to fight for our beliefs, and when do we compromise in search of common ground? How do we move forward together? This evening's distinguished speaker has a unique perspective on those questions, as he has made bipartisanship, collaboration, and pragmatism the trademarks of a successful political career. Charlie Baker is the 72nd governor of Massachusetts, an office he has held since January 2015. Born in New York but raised in Needham, Massachusetts, Governor Baker got an early start navigating lively political discussions because his father, Charles, was a conservative Republican and his mother, Anne, a liberal Democrat. No topic was off limits, I imagine, at the family dinner table. Governor Baker received a bachelor's degree from Harvard and an MBA from Northwestern. He began his professional career working for the Massachusetts High-Tech Council, but in 1991, Governor Bill Weld hired him to be Undersecretary of Health and Human Services, and a year later, Governor Weld promoted him to be secretary. Governor Baker went on to serve as Secretary of Administration and Finance in the Weld and Cellucci administrations until 1998, when he left state government to become CEO of Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. During a decade as CEO, Governor Baker helped rescue Harvard Pilgrim from the brink of bankruptcy and turned it into a profitable healthcare insurer, which was ranked America's best health plan for 5 years in a row. In 2010, he ran unsuccessfully for governor, but 4 years later, he defeated his Democratic opponent to win the governorship. And since taking office, Governor Baker has worked to close budget gaps, to invest in education and transportation, and to tackle some of the toughest problems facing the Commonwealth, including the opioid epidemic. On that issues and others, he has worked with the Democratic legislature to pass landmark bills with broad bipartisan support, putting aside political divisions in order to improve the lives of Massachusetts citizens. This approach has earned Governor Baker praise within the Commonwealth and around the country, and he is frequently ranked as one of the most popular governors in America. At a time of such deep division in our public life, Governor Baker's example as a Republican leader in a decidedly liberal and democratic-leaning state offers a glimpse at a better way forward for our politics. The governor has taken an equally broad-minded approach to choosing personnel to staff his administration. Not only has he recruited several superbly capable Democrats, he has not let his Harvard pedigree prevent him from hiring the beneficiaries of a Tufts education. These include his chief of staff, Steve Kadish, among others, and his education secretary and former member of the Tisch College Board, Jim Pizer, and his deputy chief of staff, Mindy Darbloff. I know we're going to learn a lot from the governor this evening. I'm going to begin by asking a few questions, and then we have some questions that students will pose. So please welcome the governor of the Commonwealth, the Honorable Charles Baker.
The acoustics in here are pretty good.
Yeah.
I bet they can hear us in the back even if we don't have a mic.
Well, I'm going to use the mic if it's okay. So let me ask you, Governor, since graduating from Harvard, you held 2 senior cabinet level positions in state government. You were the CEO of a large health plan, and now you're the governor of the Commonwealth. Do you think you might have at least made something of yourself if you had a Tufts education? You don't have to answer that.
No, I did hear that you mentioned that some of the folks who work in our administration went to Tufts and graduated about the same time that I went to Harvard and graduated from Harvard. And I said to some folks earlier, I don't know where Mindy is, but Mindy Darbeloff, who works in our administration, she's Deputy Chief of Staff. She's probably my oldest friend, which says something about you, my dear. But she was a Tufts class of 80. I was Harvard class of 79. I spent a lot of time here during that period, and I said earlier that I was really glad there was no YouTube back then.
Well, welcome back to both of you. So you've been in and out of state government in Massachusetts for nearly 20 years. You've served 2 cabinet positions during the administrations of Governor Weld and Cellucci. How's the State House changed over the years? How's it different today than it was back then?
You know, on some level, it's not that much different, okay? I mean, the vibe in the building dating all the way back to when I was working for the high-tech industry in the 1980s was always a pretty engaging one, and it's been primarily dominated by Democrats over that period of time, but there have been a smattering of Republicans who have played key roles over that period as well. And I guess what I would say is the issues of the day at a specific level tend to change, but at a global level, they remain more or less the same, which is what are we going to do to try and improve the quality of life in our communities? And that usually comes down to conversations about the economy, about civil rights, about education, about transportation, and a lot of the other issues that we deal with now, and some of which Alan mentioned in his opening remarks. What changes to some extent are the specifics of those and the relative level of involvement or participation in those, depending upon what happens to be particularly hot at a particular point in time. When I was, 20 days after we got elected in 2015, it started to snow, and it snowed for about 25 of the next 30 days. I'm sure many of you remember that, especially those of you who are from the West Coast. And we were sort of under siege due to the weather. The MBTA broke down and completely collapsed for about a week or so. And that just threw the whole question about transportation generally and public transportation in particular front and center in a way that, Martha Coakley and I both ran for governor, as did Steve Grossman and a bunch of other people for, 15 months. The number of times we spent talking about the MBTA in particular, if it got 15 minutes, I'd be surprised. And yet that became, in some respects, one of the most overwhelming issues of the first 2 years of our administration. And that wasn't something we were expecting to be dealing with. So I would say to some extent, the themes don't change that much, but the specifics and the emphasis change a lot based on the context.
Well, if you took any hits because of the snow, we want...
No, and I'll tell you why.
Excuse me.
The answer to this one's actually, for me, not that complicated. It's a difficult issue, but I've always been a big believer that the most important thing you can do at the state level, and I would argue this one flows up to the federal level as well, is remember that you're not the only part of government that matters. And as a former local official, and as somebody who spent a lot of time with my elected colleagues in local government, one of the things I learned as a local official is nobody is more accountable to the people in their community than a local official is. People know where they live, they know their phone numbers, they shop in the same stores, they see them on the same ball fields, they know what classes their kids go to, what sports they play, and they are completely and utterly accountable to the people in their community. And an issue like this one, local communities should be able to make the decisions that they believe are in the best interests of the people of their community. I mean, one of the things I hear a lot these days from folks is, what are we going to do at the state level to engage in debate, discussion, advocacy with respect to things that's going on at the federal level that people don't like or appreciate and don't support? Well, I can tell you, as somebody who served in local government, state government has a tendency to do a lot of things that make life complicated for people at the local level as well. Now, I think communities take very different approaches to the way they balance public safety issues with housing issues, with economic issues, with logistical issues, transportation issues, issues of culture, and all the rest. And that's where decisions like that belong. I don't want to take away the right of duly elected local officials to make the decisions that they believe are in the best interest of serving and supporting the people who live in the communities that they see every single day, that they know best. In many cases, they know far better than those of us who spend our time on Beacon Hill. We need to remember that state government is not the only government in Massachusetts that's elected. And there are plenty of times and circumstances and situations where the local folks are best prepared and knowledgeable to do what they think works for the folks in their community. And they are accountable, far more so in many cases than the folks at the state level are. Let them make the decisions they think are in the best interest of their people.
Thank you, Governor. Back. The fact is, you are a Republican governor in a state where Democrats outnumber members of your party by more than 3 to 1. Both branches of the
I've never noticed.
Well, both branches of the legislature are overwhelmingly Democratic, but you have one of the highest approval ratings of any governor in the country. And you seem to get along pretty well. You seem to get along pretty well with legislators from both parties. So I guess I wanted to ask you how you do it. What advice do you have for other chief executives in government who don't enjoy your popularity or your relationships with members of the other party?
So Alan mentioned in his introductory remarks, and by the way, you know, my mother passed away earlier this year. I really wish she'd been here to hear that introduction, Alan, because she would have believed it. But she was a, liberal Democrat, and my dad was a conservative Republican. He served in 2 administrations in Washington, D.C., and they canceled each other's votes out for 60 years with authority a lot of the time. And, Mindy used to, this is no joke, Mindy said she didn't like coming to my house for dinner when we were kids because, my parents would expect you to come prepared to play in the course of the political conversation that took place at the table. And they, they loved each other, okay? It wasn't about name-calling or character assassination or talking points. It was a conversation. And they were trying to go somewhere when they talked about this stuff. And I grew up thinking sometimes my mom was right, sometimes my dad was right, and this is no joke. Over time, you could watch in some issues where literally my mom would start here and end up over here, and my dad would start there and end up over here. And the biggest lesson I took from that was you cheat yourself if you're not willing to listen to people who don't spout the same thing you do all the time. You miss out on a chance to learn and to grow from the life experience and the points of view that other people bring to bear. I mean, I said earlier today at another event I was at that I see the world a lot differently at 60 than I did when I was 30. And part of that's because I've talked to a lot more people and listened to a lot more people who've had all kinds of life experiences of one type or another that they've shared with me over the course of my career and my life. And I know that I am richer for that and better for it and more informed and hopefully better prepared to make decisions. But if you cheat yourself out of ever being willing to listen to or have a conversation with or honestly engage in a debate or a discussion with somebody you don't agree with on something, you really do minimize your capacity for growth. Now, Jamie Eldridge, state senator, kicks my brains in on Twitter sort of all day long, every day, right? Guess who we worked with most closely to get the transportation networking legislation passed during the last legislative session? Jamie Eldridge. He was the guy we worked with in the Senate to get that legislation passed. You know, Barney Frank said one time, if you want somebody who's going to vote the same way you do every time, run for office. And by the way, he would then say, I don't even like the votes I take some of the time. But the point here is today's adversary is tomorrow's supporter. And democracy is not supposed to be about everybody or anybody getting their way all the time. I mean, our founders made very clear that they were terrified of the tyranny of the majority. So they created all kinds of minority rights, which are some of the most important elements of our state constitution, and became the elements that ultimately became part of the US Constitution. And that design was based on this idea that people who didn't agree all the time about things were going to have to find a way to figure out what they did agree on if they wanted to get something done. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I don't come at that, disappointed or aggravated about the fact that I'm not always going to get what I want. I actually feel just the opposite. I think it's a beautiful thing. And that's the way I think it's supposed to work. If you truly want to, over time, represent the people, all of the people, who were elected to serve.
Well, you've described pretty well exactly.
I got bad news for you. We've never cut funds to public education.
This administration is against education. You have $12 billion.
All right. I was about to say, Governor, you described exactly why we have a distinguished speaker series, so that students will have an opportunity to listen. And I wish more of our students would listen, because thank you for articulating that. Well, let me move on to the topic of healthcare, which is something that you know something about. How do you think repeal of the Affordable Care Act is going to affect Massachusetts? And since we don't know what is likely to take its place, what kind of replacement would you like to see?
So, governors, Republicans, and Democrats have spent a tremendous amount of time talking to each other over the course of the past few months about just this issue. And in fact, tomorrow, I'm going down to Washington for the National Governors Association meetings, which happen every February and will start on Friday and run through Tuesday. And we'll talk about all kinds of things. We'll talk about transportation, we'll talk about education, we'll talk about opioids, we'll talk about Health and Human Services, and we'll talk about the Affordable Care Act. And a lot of us will spend time with each other, but we're also going to spend time talking to our U.S. senators and our respective members of Congress. And one of the things a group of us, and it's a pretty big group at this point, have been doing is trying to create what I would describe as a framework for whatever the replacement piece of this looks like. And our view on this is relatively uncomplicated. I think our sense is that if we can get a fairly significant number of governors from states that took the expansion and states that didn't take the expansion, from states that are governed by Republican governors and Democrat governors, and states that have Republican congressional delegations and U.S. senators and Democrat delegations and U.S. senators, we can create a pretty decent critical mass that can probably at least participate significantly in advocating for our position in this debate. But this is a great example of where, you know, it would not make a heck of a lot of sense for me on my own, as just the governor of Massachusetts, to advocate. I could choose to do that just through our delegation, but the real opportunity here is to work collaboratively with other governors who find themselves in similar situations to the one we find ourselves in, figuring out what it is we can agree on, and then advocate for that, not just on behalf of Massachusetts, but hopefully on behalf of 20 or 25 states, all of which have a very big interest in what happens here. And that's the approach we're taking, and that's what we're going to spend a good part of our time when we're down there this weekend talking about.
I want to give students a chance, so I'm going to ask one more question, which I think is appropriate, because I think Americans generally, and young people in particular at this moment in time, are really turned off by politics, and they've lost confidence in public institutions, and they don't believe that the government is really working on their behalf. What comfort can you give us about your view about how government really works to improve people's lives, and what would you advise young people who are despairing about the state of American politics?
Let me answer the second part first, which is to come spend some time with it. To work for a state rep, to work for a state senator, to work for a city councilor, to work for a mayor, to work for, you know, somebody who's involved in public life in the community you're from. I can't, until you've been there, it's hard for me to articulate why that matters, but there are things that happen every single day in government that are positive. Every single day. And I'll give you a couple, but they don't generate a heck of a lot of news because, frankly, they're not that interesting. But let me give you a couple of examples of things that I view as pretty positive that, again, don't generate a lot of news. So we passed this transportation networking legislation, which created a background check process, a licensure process, and a sort of an identification process for Uber, Lyft, Bridge, and the other transportation networking companies. And then the folks at the RIDE, which is one of the major public entities that provides transportation services, primarily to seniors and people with disabilities, went to the transportation networking company and said, would you guys be willing to try a pilot where you would offer the same point-to-point service for people with disabilities that you offer to sort of regular subscribers who participate in Uber and Lyft? And Uber and Lyft said yes, and the ride negotiated an affordable price, left the price for the people who took the ride to be the same, and we're about to hit the 10,000th ride that's been offered through this demonstration project. We started with folks at Perkins because we figured that would be a good place to go. And there are about 700 people who are actually participating in this demonstration, and I've met with a bunch of them and talked to them about it. I'm not kidding when I say it's changed their life. The hardest thing for somebody with a disability who wants to complete their education or get a job or keep a job is to be able to get to and from school or to and from work. And the ride, while it's okay, you got to order it the night before. You got to map out the schedule in advance. It's not a point-to-point service, so in some cases you have to change transportation modes more than once. And if something goes wrong at some point, like you have to stay an extra 15 minutes after class to talk to your professor, or you have to do something at work that leaves you a little late, you can miss your connection, and then you're screwed. And these folks now literally in a position where they can use the same phone that any of you use who participate with Uber and Lyft to get that same ad hoc, always available, 24/7 transportation opportunity to get to and from school or to and from work. Now, we've done 10,000 of these on a demonstration basis. I can promise you we're going to do a lot more. But when you talk to people who literally are crying because of the difference this has made in their lives, it's pretty hard to convince me that government can't do anything well or benefit people. I'll give you two other examples. We have a horrible problem with opioids. And we're not the only ones that have it. It's ravaging the Commonwealth and the country. I didn't run for governor to focus on this issue, but I heard about it every time I had a town meeting. And the way it started was town meeting would end, somebody would come up to me after it was over, and they'd say, "You're a healthcare guy, right?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sort of." And they'd say, "I got this friend." And then they tell me the story about their friend who was dealing with this, and they had asked me if I could give them help with respect to where their friend might go. And so I would connect them with whoever I could connect them with. But this happened a lot, to the point where I started talking about it in my town hall meetings, just to see if I started bringing it up, if that would give people permission to bring it up themselves in the course of the conversation. And then people would start saying, it wasn't a friend anymore. They'd say, "I got a brother, a sister, a boss, a mom, a dad, a son, a daughter." And no matter where they were in their life, the story, whether sometimes the person had literally died of an overdose. Sometimes they were in recovery and fingers crossed that this time it would work. Or sometimes they were just in the midst of the brutality of addiction itself. And they all would say, same thing, it's been hell. It's been hell. Every single one of them, it's been hell. And part of what made it hell was they didn't feel they could talk to anybody about it, because it was viewed as kind of a character flaw and not as an illness. So then I started telling the folks on the campaign, I don't know if this is just me, but I'm hearing this everywhere I go. Is there something big going on here? So they went and collected a bunch of data, and it was staggering. Over the course of 15 years, opioid prescribing going like this, overdose going like this, deaths going like this, literally tracking to the point where in 2014, there were 240 opioid prescriptions written in the United States of America, 240 million, a country with 300 million people, most of whom are healthy most of the time. And we were consuming, we still do, 80% of the world's opioids, even though we only represent 5% of the world's population. So then I said, this needs to be something that we chase, and we chase hard. And it has tons of really negative momentum. But there's some really good things happening here. Until we got into this, you didn't have to pass a course in opioid therapy or pain management to graduate from dental school or medical school or nursing school in Massachusetts. Now you do. You didn't have to take a course in opioid therapy or pain management to get your license renewed if you were a prescriber in Massachusetts. Now you do. We didn't have any education going on at all, the middle schools or the high schools, for athletes or coaches or parents about the upsides and the downsides of pain management, pain medication, and addiction. Now we do. We have hundreds of new treatment beds that have gone online over the course of the past 2 years. We've increased state spending by 50% in treatment and recovery. And after 30 years of promising to stop sending women who had been civilly committed due to an addiction to Framingham State Prison, we finally got legislation passed, and women now go into a treatment program, either at Taunton State Hospital or at one of a number of other certified treatment programs instead. 46 governors, other governors, adopted our blueprint and the legislation we passed to chase this issue in their own states. Now, this one is one, this was 15 years in the making. The likelihood that it's going to go away overnight is zero. But for the first time in the last 18 years, the total number of prescriptions written in Massachusetts opioid prescriptions went down by 15% last year. And we're actually starting to see some real benefits from some of the changes we made with respect to the way treatment protocol works. Now, this one's going to be an arc, okay? It's not going to happen overnight. It's probably going to happen over the course of time. But if we stick with it, and everybody else sticks with it, and we continue to learn from others as best practices evolve and develop, we'll beat it. But again, from my point of view, I can't think of a more important issue, having spent too much time talking to too many people who've lost their loved ones to this epidemic, than to spend time on working an issue like that. And it's been completely bipartisan. Every single we got 4 pieces of legislation passed on this. They all passed unanimously. Nobody voted against it.
Thank you. I'm going to ask... Thank you.
Governor Baker, can you please commit to stop militarizing the police?
I don't really know what that question means, so it's hard for me to answer. What I can tell you is one of the things I'm most proud of is here in the Commonwealth of Mass, we have supported, in conjunction with our colleagues in local government, marches and protests, dozens of them, since we took office in 2015, with not a single incident in any of them.
We have a couple of students that wanted to ask a question. I think we're probably, if we push it a little, we have time for 2. One. I'll tell you what, 2 but short answers, or short questions.
Okay. Hi, Governor Baker. My name is Benya Krause. I'm an international relations major, a junior. Governor Baker, I think as we've seen in this room, we are very proud that Tufts University has recently pledged publicly that it will support our undocumented student population by engaging in non-compliance with federal immigration officers absent a subpoena. I'm going to deviate a little from this because I think you've touched on this. But I've had the great privilege of being able to spend a summer at the Massachusetts State House, and I've seen, as you've mentioned, statewide legislation to increase the number of treatment beds for the opioid epidemic. I've seen how state legislation has been able to help vulnerable communities, such as, expanding early child education for all children. So my question is, as you know, Senator James Eldridge has sponsored the Massachusetts Safe Communities Act. How would supporting this piece of statewide legislation to help vulnerable communities, especially communities that are vulnerable under this federal government, how might supporting this differ, does it differ from the statewide action you've already taken to support and protect vulnerable communities in Massachusetts? Thank you.
Well, as I said earlier, I start with the premise that the way people most of the time think about how things are going in the Commonwealth of Mass has a lot more to do with how they think things are going in their community than they do with how they think things are going on Beacon Hill. Okay, I mean, when you ask most people that question, the way they're going to answer it is going to be driven by how they think things are going in their neighborhood, in their community, in their schools, and in their life. That's the way people answer that question. It might be a question about Massachusetts, but most people don't get esoteric about that. They answer that question based on what's going on at home. And that's why, for me, the right way to handle this is to give folks at the local level the ability to make the decisions they think work best for them. And, you know, we have a whole variety of relationships in law enforcement, transportation, education, environment, across a whole wide number of topics with local communities. And we do the best we can to bend to meet them, as opposed to the opposite, which is telling them what to do and then expecting them to bend to meet us. And on an issue like this, I really do believe the locals, I don't want to tell the mayor of Medford what to do on this issue. I want her to do what she thinks makes the most sense for them. Same with Somerville or Springfield or New Bedford. And let me tell you something, having talked to most of the mayors in those communities and having talked to their elected officials, they have very different ideas about what they think the best thing is to do to protect the citizens in their community are. Shouldn't we let them be the ones who make the call, since they're the ones that are closest to what's happening there? The other thing I would say with respect to this is we've been pretty aggressive about sending a message to cities and towns that we want to be collaborators. And if you look at the way we've gone about building our economic development programming, or our downtown development programming, or affordable housing programming, or the stuff we've done with substance abuse and other issues, it's almost always built around this notion that we want to be facilitators who make it possible for communities to succeed. We don't want to be the thou shalt people. And the other thing I would say about the thou shalt thing, you get into this thou shalt business, and what happens when somebody's in charge who you disagree with? And they thou shalt you into something that you think is just fundamentally wrong for your community. I mean, we wield a very heavy stick in government. We should be very careful about how we swing it.
Thank you. I know that the most important people in your administration are the folks who take you from place to place, and I've learned a long time ago to listen to them. So the evening has come to...
Me too.
I want to thank you, though, for being here. I think that you've seen that students on this campus and other campuses feel very passionate about things. I also think that we have to confront the reality that we haven't done the best job we could in preparing young people for democracy. We believe we're in a crisis moment in terms of the civic and engagement and the civic education of young people. And Tisch College exists in order to try to help prepare this next generation to participate. One of the ways that we can teach that is by bringing leaders like you who are making government work, who are talking across differences, and to model that. And so I really want to, on behalf of the entire community, thank you for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it too.
But we certainly owe you a gift or two. So very quickly, Charlie, I wish you had played basketball at Tufts, but you played at another institution, but you can certainly wear a Tufts basketball hat.
Absolutely.
Right? You may have noticed that many of us are wearing elephant ties. It isn't a political symbol. Jumbo is the mascot, but we wanted you to have an elephant tie.
Yeah, I heard you have a new Jumbo.
We do.
Congratulations.
And we have a gift for Lucy, your dog. We have a collar, compliments of the Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine, which I'm sure you've never heard of.